A 24-year-old American soldier is sitting in a muddy trench somewhere in France, writing a letter by candlelight. Outside, artillery fire echoes in the distance. His hands are shaking not from fear, but from cold. He writes, "I can picture you now, darling, with your rust-colored hair and that smudge of dirt on the tip of your nose. You are with me constantly, even though we are 7,000 miles apart, across the ocean." An 18-year-old girl receives the letter weeks later. She reads it over and over until the ink starts to fade from her tears. She writes back immediately, seals it, and prays he's still alive to read it. This happened millions of times during World War II. Soldiers and their loved ones wrote letters, sometimes hundreds of them, trying to hold onto love in the middle of a war that was tearing the world apart. Some of these love stories ended with reunions. Others ended with telegrams that started with the words, "The War Department deeply regrets to inform you that," were telling the real stories behind those letters. The couples who waited years to be together, the ones who were torn apart forever, and the ones who found each other again 75 years later. These aren't Hollywood movies. These are real people, real letters, and real heartbreak. Drop a comment with your favorite historical topic and smash that subscribe button for more emotional stories like this. Between 1941 and 1945, nearly 3 billion pieces of mail were exchanged between soldiers fighting overseas and the families waiting for them at home. 3 billion. That's not an exaggeration. That's how desperately people needed to stay connected during the war. Letters were everything. They were proof someone was still alive. They were hope. They were the only way to say "I love you" when you were 7,000 miles apart and didn't know if you'd ever see each other again. Mail call was sacred. Soldiers would crowd around when the mail arrived, scanning for their names, praying there was anything from home. If your name wasn't called, you'd walk away feeling like you'd been gut punched. A letter could make you feel human again, even if just for a few minutes. It could remind you why you were fighting. And for some soldiers, it was the only thing keeping them alive. One of the most incredible love stories from World War II started with letters. A navigator named Dada and a trauma nurse named Nana exchanged 900 letters during the war. 900. Dada flew on B-17 flying fortresses with the 8th Air Force, leading pathfinding missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross twice, one of the highest honors the Air Force can give. Nana was a surgical trauma nurse who landed at Normandy on day 8 of the invasion, just days after D-Day. She followed the front lines through France, witnessed the liberation of Buchenwald, and was there when the Allies entered Berlin. They met before the war, fell in love, and then spent years apart, him in the sky dodging flak and enemy fighters, her on the ground treating soldiers with horrific injuries. They wrote constantly. Sometimes he'd write sitting on a crate in freezing rain. Sometimes she'd write in between surgeries, her hands still shaking from exhaustion. The letters were raw, honest, vulnerable in a way people rarely are. Dada would describe what he saw: bombed out cities, friends who didn't make it back from missions. Nana would write about the soldiers she couldn't save, the ones who died calling for their mothers. And here's the part that'll break you. Nana wrote this in one of her letters. Long before they were even married: "I save your letters, each one, because they'll be valuable someday to someone besides me." She knew. Somehow, she knew that their story mattered. Decades later, their son found those 900 letters in a trunk in the basement. It took him 10 years to read through them all and piece together their wartime love story. When he finished reading the last letter, he said he cried because reading the letters meant he had to say goodbye to his parents a second time. But not all letters made it through. The mail system during World War II was a logistical nightmare. A letter sent from the US to a soldier in the Pacific could take weeks, sometimes months. Ships were sunk, mail got lost, sometimes letters arrived in the wrong order. So, you'd read about something that happened in July before you got the letter from May. Soldiers described the agony of waiting days, weeks without hearing anything. The silence was torture. Was she okay? Did she move on? Did she forget about me? To speed things up, the U.S. government introduced V-mail in 1942 Victory Mail. Letters were photographed onto microfilm, flown overseas, and then printed on the other end. It saved space and weight, which meant more supplies could be transported. Between June 1942 and November 1945, over 1 billion V-mails were processed. 1 billion. Soldiers and their families sent tiny, condensed letters that could fit on a single page. They had to make every word count. One wife, Jacqueline, wrote to her husband Mike, a Navy officer stationed on the USS Benson, in October 1941 before Pearl Harbor, before the war even started for America. She wrote, "All is quiet in camp, and though I enjoy the restfulness, I miss you even more at this hour. During the day, I am so busy that I have only time for pleasant thoughts of you and the beautiful past we have spent together. But when I sit down to rest, the thoughts of anxiety crowd in, and I feel I must run out of the house into the darkness and find you and gather you safely into my arms, like a mother hen gathers her brood under her wings. I want all my brood under my wing when night comes." Mike never made it home. In 1942, Jacqueline received a telegram. It had red stars on it, the kind that wives and mothers dreaded. "The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Lieutenant Commander Millard Jefferson Klein, U.S. Navy, is missing following action in the performance of his duty." Missing. Not dead. Missing. Which meant she didn't know. For months, she didn't know if he was alive, captured, or at the bottom of the ocean. That's its own kind of hell. Letters were lifelines, but they were also goodbyes. Soldiers would write letters knowing they might not survive the next battle. Some men wrote letters and left them with friends, with instructions. "If I don't make it, send this to her." Imagine that. Imagine writing a letter to the person you love, knowing they'll only read it if you're dead. What do you even say? One soldier, Steve Laskamp, wrote to his wife Dorothy in August 1944, exactly 1 year before D-Day. He described sitting outside under a big silver moon and a cool breeze, thinking about the night he proposed. "What a night, darling," he wrote. "It reminds me of August 15th when I proposed to the girl of my dreams." Steve survived the war. He and Dorothy spent the next 6 decades together. When they died, Steve in 1999, Dorothy in 2004, they were buried side by side in a veterans cemetery in North Carolina. Dorothy's tombstone has an inscription, "USO Bride." She met him at a dance. One dance, and it turned into a lifetime. But here's the thing about war. It doesn't care about love stories. It doesn't care if you just got engaged. It doesn't care if you've been writing letters every day for 3 years. It doesn't care if you made promises you plan to keep. War takes people, and sometimes it doesn't give them back. In June 1944, a 24-year-old American soldier named K.T. Robbins was stationed in a small French village called Brie, near the German border. His job? Running a mobile bakery unit that made 3,000 pounds of bread every day for the troops. It wasn't glamorous, but somebody had to do it. One day, KT needed help with his laundry, so he asked a local woman if she could wash his uniforms. She said yes, and then he met her daughter. Her name was Jeannine. She was 18 years old. And KT fell in love immediately. They spent 2 months together walking through the village, talking even though he spoke no French and she spoke no English, stealing whatever moments they could while the war raged around them. KT later said, "I think she loved me." Jeannine said, "When he left in the truck, I cried. Of course, I was very sad. I wish, after the war, he hadn't returned to America, but KT had to leave. One morning, without warning, his unit was called to the Eastern Front. He barely had time to say goodbye. Jeannine stood there, watching the truck drive away, crying, and KT looked back, knowing he might never see her again. Before he left, he gave her a photograph of himself, and she gave him one of her standing with her hands on her hips, smiling at the camera. KT kept that photo for 75 years. After the war, KT returned to the United States. He met a woman named Lillian, who worked at a shirt factory. They'd started exchanging letters during the final months of the war. They got married, ran a hardware store together in Memphis, Tennessee, and stayed together for 70 years. Lillian died in 2015 at the age of 92. And after she passed, KT started thinking about Jeannine again. He went to his trunk and found the photograph still there, after all those years. Her face hadn't changed in his memory. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Jeannine had also moved on. She got married in 1949, had 5 children, lived a full life. But she never forgot KT after he left. She started learning basic English phrases, hoping that maybe one day he'd come back. I always wondered, she said decades later. Where is he? Will he come back? In 2019, KT Robbins, now 97 years old, traveled back to France for the 75th anniversary of D-Day. He brought the photograph with him. He showed it to some French journalists who were filming a documentary about American veterans. He told them the story how he'd met this girl in Briey, how they'd fallen in love, how he'd never forgotten her. He said he wanted to visit Briey again and maybe find her family. He assumed she was dead. The journalists decided to track her down. And against all odds, they found her. Jeannine Pearson, she'd remarried after her husband died, was still alive. She was 92 years old, living in a retirement home in Montigny-les-Metz. The journalists arranged a reunion. On June 6, 2019 D-Day, KT Robbins and Jeannine Pearson saw each other again for the first time in 75 years. The footage of their reunion will destroy you. KT walks into the room, and Jeannine is sitting there, waiting. They look at each other, and then they embrace. KT is crying. Jeannine is crying. He holds her face in his hands and says, "I always loved you. You never got out of my heart." Jeannine, speaking in French to the reporters, says, "He said he loves me. I understood that much." They spent a few hours together, holding hands, reminiscing, catching up on 75 years of life. KT showed her the photograph he'd kept all those years, the one of her standing with her hands on her hips, smiling. She stared at it, probably remembering the girl she used to be. They talked about what could have been, what should have been, what almost was. And then KT had to leave. He had to get to Normandy for the D-Day commemoration ceremony. Before he left, they kissed, they hugged, they cried. And KT said, "Jeannine, I love you, girl." Jeannine later told reporters, "I always thought he'd come back." After the reunion, KT invited Jeannine and her family to visit him in the United States. He said, "Why don't you bring her over and stay a couple weeks with me? I'll take care of you." A Parisian man, inspired by the story, volunteered to act as an email translator so KT and Jeannine could keep in touch. KT, who'd never used a computer in his life, learned how to send emails just so he could talk to her. When asked if they'd get married, KT laughed and said, "It's too late in the day. But to visit would be great. This is the power of love. 75 years, to lifetimes. Marriages, children, grandchildren, loss, grief, decades of wondering what if." And then, at 97 and 92, they found each other again. For a few hours, they weren't old. They weren't veterans of a war that ended before most people alive today were born. They were just KT and Jeannine, two kids who fell in love in a French village in 1944. Not every love story from World War II has a reunion. Some of them end with a telegram. Some of them end with a letter that's never delivered. And some of them end with a name on a list of the missing. On August 7, 1944, a British hospital ship called the SS Amsterdam was sailing off Juno Beach in Normandy. It was marked with a giant red cross, the universal symbol that says, "This is a medical ship. Don't shoot." But that didn't matter. The ship hit a mine and started sinking fast. On board were two nurses, Sister Mollie Evershed and Sister Dorothy Anyta Field, who went by Anyta. They were part of the Queen Alexander's Imperial Military Nursing Service. When the mine exploded, chaos erupted. The ship was going down. Lifeboats were being lowered. Injured soldiers were screaming. Mollie and Anyta didn't run for the lifeboats. They went below deck, again and again. They dragged wounded soldiers up to the top deck, one by one, and got them into the lifeboats. 75 men. They saved 75 men. On the final trip down, the ship sank. Mollie and Anyta went down with it. Their bodies were never recovered. Anyta had already lost her brother Charles, a test pilot, in 1943. Her parents were still grieving him when they got the news about their daughter. The soldiers Anyta saved wrote letters to her parents, thanking them, telling them how brave she was, how she could have gotten out but chose to go back. One letter said, "She reached the lifeboat, but she went back. She went back for us." In 1945, both nurses were posthumously mentioned in dispatches and received the King's Commendation for brave conduct. There's a statue now, a memorial, but that doesn't bring them back. That doesn't change the fact that Mollie's parents lost their daughter, that Anyta's family lost 2 children in the same war. And the worst part, Anyta might have been in love. We don't know. The records don't say. But she was 25 years old. There could have been someone waiting for her. Someone who got a telegram that started with, "It is my painful duty to inform you." Thousands of families got those telegrams. Wives, mothers, fiancés, girlfriends. The telegrams were short, cold, official. The War Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, son, brother was killed in action. Sometimes they'd add missing in action, which was almost worse, because it meant you didn't know. You couldn't grieve. You couldn't move on. You were stuck in limbo, hoping, praying, but knowing deep down that missing usually meant dead. One paratrooper, Captain William Nation, wrote letters home throughout the war. In June 1944, 16 days after D-Day, he wrote about his jump into Normandy. Right after the chute opened, I looked down and saw the reflection of the moon in water. We were out over a river. I hit water knee-deep and fell backwards, half shocked, surprised. He described the chaos, the machine gun fire, the hell that broke loose in France. His last letter home was in January 1945. It was short, exhausted. "I have tried so hard to write letters, but there is nothing much to write about, except the war, and I don't like to write about that. I have seen all I want to see of it." 12 days later, on January 31, 1945, Captain Nation was killed by enemy fire. He was 25 years old. He never got married, never had kids, never got to live the life he was fighting for. His nephew, Bill Nation, didn't know him. He only knew the flickering images of war from old film reels. But decades later, Bill found his uncle's diary and letters. He read them. He learned about the man his uncle was, the dreams, the fears, the exhaustion. And Bill traveled to Normandy to trace his uncle's steps, to honor his sacrifice, to make sure Captain William Nation wasn't just a number on a casualty list. This happened 384,000 times. That's how many British soldiers died in World War II. Each one of them left behind someone. A mother, a wife, a girlfriend, a fiancé. Someone who waited for letters that stopped coming. Someone who got a telegram instead. And it wasn't just combat deaths. Disease killed more soldiers in some theaters than the enemy did. Malaria was rampant in the Pacific. One soldier wrote to his girlfriend, describing the heat, the mosquitoes, the constant threat of disease. He told her not to join the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. "Forget it, please," he wrote, "unless you want to go mad." He survived the war, but a lot of his friends didn't. He wrote, "All my old friends except 4 have gone out that way. So I won't leave them with nobody to follow." That's what war does. It makes you the survivor, the one who made it home when everyone else didn't. And you carry that guilt forever. When the war ended in 1945, millions of soldiers came home. And for the couples who'd been separated some for years, the reunions should have been joyful. Tears of happiness, picking up where they left off. Starting the life they dreamed about in all those letters. But it didn't always work that way, or changes people. The 20-year-old kid who left in 1942 wasn't the same person who came back in 1945. He'd seen things, done things, lost friends, watched people die. And the girl who waited for him, she'd changed too. She'd spent years working in factories, raising kids alone, or serving as a nurse. They'd both become different people. Some couples reunited and realized they didn't know each other anymore. The letters had kept an idea of each other alive, a version of who they used to be. But in person, face to face, they were strangers. One veteran later said, "I was never me anymore." His wife couldn't understand what he'd been through. He couldn't explain it. The war had built a wall between them. Other couples made it work. They had to relearn each other. It took time, patience, a lot of arguments and late-night conversations. But eventually, they found their way back. One couple, John Meads and Betty, exchanged letters while John was stationed near Hamburg in 1946-1947, helping with the demobilization effort. Their letters started tentative, almost insecure. "I was so pleased to hear from you," they wrote. "I thought you had forgotten all about me." But over time, their relationship deepened. They fell in love through the letters, and when John finally came home, they got married. It worked. They spent the rest of their lives together. Another soldier, Nadal Belantoni, served with the U.S. Navy Seabees in the Pacific. He spent years in New Caledonia, New Guinea, Los Negros, Manus, Panem, and Okinawa. He was an artist, so he sent sketches and paintings to his sweetheart, Irene Stachinsky, along with letters. Hundreds of them. After years apart, Nat and Irene were finally reunited. They got married on January 6, 1946 for days before Nat was formally discharged. They settled in Reading, Massachusetts, raised 3 children, and Nat worked as an artist for the rest of his career. And then there's the couple we started with, Dada and Nana, the navigator and the nurse who exchanged 900 letters. They made it. They came home, got married, built a life together. But their story didn't truly come full circle until decades later, when their son found those letters and spent 10 years piecing together the story of their wartime love. The letters became a book, a legacy. Proof that love can survive even the worst circumstances, but not everyone got that ending. Some soldiers came home and their girlfriends had moved on. Some wives had remarried, thinking their husbands were dead. Some couples tried to make it work and couldn't. The divorce rate spiked after the war. People didn't talk about it much, but it happened, and some soldiers never came home at all. 400,000 American service members died in World War II. Each one of them had someone waiting. Someone who kept their letters. Someone who never stopped hoping. And when the war ended, those people didn't get a reunion. They got a folded flag and a telegram. The love letters from World War II are more than just history. They reproof that even in the darkest times, even when the world is tearing itself apart, people still find ways to love each other. They write letters by candlelight in muddy trenches. They wait years for someone who might never come home. They hold onto photographs for 75 years. They save 900 letters in a trunk because they know, somehow, that the story matters. War tried to destroy everything, but it couldn't destroy love. It couldn't stop people from hoping, from dreaming, from promising each other, "I'll come back to you," and sometimes against all odds they did. So that's the story of love during World War II. 3 billion letters, 900 exchanges between a navigator and a nurse, a 75-year wait before 2 people saw each other again. Nurses who saved 75 lives before they drowned, soldiers who wrote letters knowing they might never be read. And millions of people, soldiers, wives, mothers, girlfriends who waited, hoped, and prayed that the person they loved would make it home. Some of them did. Some of them didn't. And some of them came home so changed by the war that they didn't recognize themselves anymore. But the letters remain. They're in archives, in museums, in trunks in basements, They're proof that love existed in the middle of the worst war humanity has ever seen. They're proof that even when the world is on fire, people still choose to love each other. KT and Jeannine got their reunion after 75 years. Dada and Nana came home and spent the rest of their lives together. Steve and Dorothy met at a dance and were buried side by side. But Mollie and Anyta went down with their ship. Captain William Nation never made it home, and thousands of others received telegrams instead of reunions. War doesn't care about love stories. It doesn't care about promises or plans or the future you were supposed to have. But people do. The soldiers who wrote letters by candlelight cared. The wives who waited years cared. The nurses who went back into a sinking ship cared. And that's what these stories are really about, not the war, but the people who loved each other in spite of it. The letters from World War II aren't just history, they're a reminder that love is a choice. Even when everything is falling apart, even when you don't know if you'll see tomorrow, even when the person you love is 7,000 miles away, you can still choose to hold on. You can still write the letter. You can still wait. You can still hope. And sometimes, 75 years later, you get to see them again. If this story hit you, I need to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, did you know about these love stories before? Have you ever read letters from your own family members who fought in the war? What part of this story broke your heart the most? And if you've got ideas for what topic I should cover next, let me know. I'm always looking for the stories that don't get told enough, the real, raw, emotional stuff that actually happened. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. This channel is all about history the way it really went down. No fluff, no filler, just the stories that remind us what it means to be human. Thanks for watching, and remember, love is always worth fighting for. See you in the next one.